The Kirithek slave market on Vel'tar Prime buzzed with the usual collection of scum, dealers and buyers looking for their next piece of living property. I adjusted my scanner goggles and leaned against the grimy wall, watching another day's worth of misery unfold in the name of profit. Fresh meat from the outer colonies, hollered Krell then, his forearms gesturing wildly at the new arrivals. The Borthak trader's yellow eyes gleamed with greed as potential buyers circled his latest collection like vultures. Got some real exotic pieces today, folks, including a genuine Terran deathworlder. Oh, please. I rolled my eyes so hard they nearly fell out of my skull. Humans, deathworlders, whatever you wanted to call them, sure, they were big, sure they were strong, but calling them death anything was just marketing nonsense. They were basically oversized pets with anger issues. Dangerous? Maybe? Intelligent? Hey, I'd seen smarter rocks. In the center cage, a small Zephyrian child named Zara'nix huddled in the corner, her purple scales dulled from stress and malnutrition. Poor little thing couldn't have been more than 8 cycles old. Her large golden eyes darted around frantically as buyers poked and prodded at the energy bars containing her. This one's perfect for entertainment, Krell then announced with disgusting enthusiasm. Zephyrians are naturally musical. Imagine the performances you could get out of her. And if she breaks, well, he shrugged his massive shoulders. They're not exactly endangered. Right next to Zara'nix's cage sat the so-called dangerous human, Jake something or other, according to his identification tag. He looked about as threatening as a sleeping grox, which is to say, potentially problematic if you poked it, but mostly just taking up space. The human sat cross-legged on his cage floor, staring at nothing in particular with those weird little eyes humans had. Honestly, how did a species with such tiny optical sensors ever manage to leave their homeworld? That deathworlder's been quiet for 3 days now, muttered Vex Matol, the station's security chief. His tentacles twitched nervously. Makes me uncomfortable when they go silent like that. I snorted. What's he going to do, Chief? Think really hard at the energy bars. Humans are all muscle and no brain. Trust me, that one's already given up. They always do once they realize their famous human stubbornness doesn't work against proper galactic technology. Famous last words, as they say. That's when everything went sideways. One of the buyers, a particularly nasty Vrex with more money than sense, decided he wanted to test the merchandise. He activated a pain inducer through Zara'nix's collar, and the poor kid's screams echoed through the market like broken glass. Stop. Please, she sobbed, her tiny claws scratching uselessly at the metal band around her neck. The sound was heartbreaking, but this was business, and business was rarely pretty. Krell then's eyes lit up like he'd struck gold. Oh, you like that sound? Watch this. He cranked up the intensity, and Zara'nix's cries turned into pure agony. The little Zephyrian collapsed, convulsing as electrical currents coursed through her small body. The crowd of buyers loved it. Credits started flying as they placed bets on how long she'd last before passing out. 50 credits says she breaks in 2 minutes. 100 says she's unconscious in 30 seconds. Real classy bunch, this lot. That's when I noticed the human had moved. Jake was now standing at the front of his cage, those weird little eyes locked onto Zara'nix with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His knuckles were white where he gripped the energy bars, and for a moment I thought he might actually try something stupid. Easy there, Deathworlder, I called out mockingly. I know you primitives get all emotional about younglings, but there's nothing you can do from in there. Maybe if your species had invented proper technology instead of just hitting things with rocks, you'd have a chance. Jake turned those unsettling eyes toward me for just a second. There was something in his expression that I couldn't quite read, something that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. Then he smiled. Not a happy smile, not even an angry smile. Something much, much worse. Then, just like that, Jake went completely still. Not the kind of still you see when someone's sleeping or relaxing. This was different. Predator still. The kind of motionless that made every instinct I'd inherited from my prey species ancestors start screaming danger warnings. "See?" I said to Vex Matol, though my voice came out a bit higher than intended. "Told you he'd give up. Humans always fold when they realize they can't just punch their way out of problems." But something felt wrong. The air in the market had gotten colder? That was impossible. The environmental systems on Vel'tar Prime were military-grade, completely automated. Yet I could see my breath forming little puffs of vapor. "Is it just me, or are the lights flickering?" muttered one of the buyers, glancing up at the overhead illumination panels. Sure enough, they were stuttering slightly, like they couldn't decide whether to stay on or not. Through it all, Jake remained perfectly motionless, his eyes now closed like he was meditating or something equally useless. Meanwhile, little Zara'nix had stopped crying and was staring at the human with something that looked suspiciously like hope. Silly child. Hope was the first thing you learned to abandon in places like this. What could one broken Death Worlder possibly do against an entire space station full of armed professionals? Apparently, he could break the laws of physics. Jake opened his eyes and placed his palms flat against the energy bars of his cage. Not pushing, not pulling, just touching them. Like he was feeling for something the rest of us couldn't sense. "What's the idiot doing now?" Krell then laughed, pausing his torture session to watch the human's bizarre behavior. Trying to absorb the energy through his skin, humans really are as stupid as they. The lights didn't just flicker this time. They strobed like a seizure-inducing dance party, and every electronic device in the market started screaming error messages simultaneously. My scanner goggles went haywire, displaying readings that made absolutely no sense. Temperature fluctuations, energy spikes, gravitational anomalies. It was like reality itself had caught a virus. "That's not possible," Vex Matol whispered, his tentacles writhing in agitation as he stared at his security readouts. "The containment grids are quantum-locked. They're supposed to be tamper-proof." Jake wasn't tampering with them. He was doing something far worse. He was understanding them. See, we'd all made the same mistake. We assumed that because humans came from a primitive world, they must be primitive themselves. What we failed to consider was that sometimes, when you grow up on a planet that's actively trying to kill you every single day, you get really good at figuring out how things work. Because if you don't, you die. And apparently human engineers had spent centuries studying every piece of alien technology they could get their hands on. The energy bars around Jake's cage didn't shut down. They didn't malfunction. They began resonating at a frequency that turned them into the most expensive tuning forks in the galaxy. The quantum field that kept them stable started to wobble, then oscillate, then completely lose coherence. Containment breach in Section 7. Someone screamed over the station's emergency communications, and all units respond. But it wasn't just Section 7. Jake had somehow turned the entire station's power grid into a massive feedback loop. Every energy barrier, every security system, every automated defense, all of it was connected, and all of it was now singing the same catastrophic song, "Impossible." Krell then shrieked as his own control system sparked and died. Humans don't understand quantum mechanics. They're barely past combustion engines. That's when Jake spoke for the first time since his capture, his voice carrying clearly over the chaos. "Actually, we figured out quantum mechanics about 200 years ago. We just never told you." The energy bars around his cage didn't explode or shatter. They simply stopped existing. One moment they were there, the next they were just empty space filled with very confused photons. Jake stepped out of his cage like he was leaving a hotel room, brushing imaginary dust off his jumpsuit. "Now," he said, turning toward little Zara'nix with that same terrifying smile, "let's talk about proper hospitality." Every alarm on the station began screaming at once. What happened next wasn't a rampage. It was an art form. Jake moved through the slave market like he'd been planning this for months, which, considering what I learned later, he probably had. He didn't charge around like a mindless brute. He didn't roar or beat his chest or do any of the stereotypical Deathworlder nonsense we expected. Instead, he turned our own technology into his personal toolkit. The first security team that responded found their plasma rifles had mysteriously lost the ability to hold a charge. Jake had somehow reprogrammed their power cells during the 15 seconds it took them to reach the market. When they tried to switch to backup weapons, those exploded in their hands, not enough to kill, just enough to make them reconsider their career choices. How did he vex Matol started to ask, but Jake was already moving. He picked up one of the disabled plasma rifles, popped open the power cell housing, and did something with the internal components that made absolutely no sense. 30 seconds later, he had a working weapon that was somehow more powerful than when it had rolled off the assembly line. Humans aren't supposed to understand our technology. Krell then wailed as he scrambled for cover behind an overturned vendor stall. They're barbarians. They use projectile weapons. Yeah, we do, Jake called out cheerfully, systematically short-circuiting every cage lock in the market. But we also reverse engineer everything we can get our hands on. Did you really think we'd spend 300 years in galactic society without figuring out how your toys work? Prisoners began stumbling out of their cages scared, confused but free. Jake moved between them with impossible efficiency, checking injuries, offering reassurance, and somehow managing to keep track of every security threat in the area simultaneously. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. Jake wasn't just smart. He was trained, military trained. The way he moved, the way he prioritized targets, the way he managed multiple objectives at once, this wasn't some lucky escape. This was a professional operation. A Morgothi enforcer tried to flank him while Jake was helping an injured Kelvran to his feet. Without even looking, Jake backhanded the enforcer so hard that the alien's exoskeleton cracked audibly. Then he went right back to tending the wounded prisoner like nothing had happened. Medical supplies, he muttered, scanning the area. His eyes locked onto Krell then's private medical kit, the one the trader used to keep his merchandise alive long enough to sell. Jake moved toward it with purpose. Stay away from me, Deathworlder. Krell then shrieked, pulling out a neural disruptor, a weapon designed specifically to incapacitate humans. He fired it point blank at Jake's chest. Jake caught the neural pulse with his bare hand. I'm not speaking metaphorically here. He literally reached out and grabbed the energy discharge like it was a physical object, then crushed it between his fingers like he was squishing a bug. That's impossible, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the chaos. Neural disruptors work directly on the nervous system. You can't just catch them. Jake glanced at me with what might have been amusement. Human nervous systems are a bit more complicated than your textbooks suggest. We've had to adapt to some pretty harsh electromagnetic environments. He turned back to Krell then, who was now gibbering in terror. But instead of the violence I expected, Jake simply took the medical kit and walked away. He didn't hurt the traitor. Didn't even threaten him, just dismissed him as irrelevant. That scared me more than any display of violence could have. As more security teams arrived, Jake began doing something that defied everything I thought I knew about combat tactics. He was fighting defensively, using non-lethal force whenever possible, but with such devastating effectiveness that armored opponents were dropping unconscious after single blows. It was like watching someone play a video game on easy mode while simultaneously solving complex mathematical equations. But it was what he did with little Zara'nix that really broke my brain. Jake knelt beside her cage, which had remained locked despite his mass prison break. He looked at the quantum restraints for exactly 3 seconds, then began humming. Not singing, not chanting, humming. A simple, repetitive tune that made the energy field around Zara'nix's collar begin to vibrate sympathetically. Zephyrian lullaby, he explained to the terrified child. Your people's natural frequency. Energy fields hate it when you give them something to harmonize with. The collar fell apart like it was made of paper. Zara'nix stared up at him with those huge golden eyes, tears still streaming down her purple scales. Are you going to hurt me? Jake's expression softened completely. No, sweetheart. I'm going to make sure nobody ever hurts you again." And that's when I realized that humans weren't just dangerous because they were strong or smart or adaptable. They were dangerous because they cared. "Who are you?" I found myself asking, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was professional curiosity. Maybe it was the desperate need to understand how everything I thought I knew had just been turned upside down. Jake was busy fashioning some kind of communications device from the wreckage of 3 different alien technologies. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this exact thing 1,000 times before. Lieutenant Colonel Jake Morrison, 3rd Terran Engineering Corps. "Retired," he said without looking up from his work. Though I suppose retired is a relative term when you're working undercover for Terran Intelligence. My legs almost gave out. Terran Intelligence? But humans don't have. Don't have what? A functioning intelligence service? Jake's laugh was genuinely amused. "Friend, we've been mapping every slave route, every black market station, and every trafficking network in this sector for the past 5 years. Did you really think we'd just ignore the fact that our people were being sold like livestock?" The implications hit me like a plasma bolt to the face. If Jake was intelligence, if he'd been captured on purpose then. "This whole thing was planned," I whispered. Give the alien a prize," Jake said cheerfully, finally completing whatever he'd been building. The device immediately began broadcasting on what sounded like military frequencies. Though I have to admit, the timing worked out better than expected. I was supposed to gather intelligence for another 2 weeks before extraction, but he glanced at Zara'nix, who was clinging to his leg like he was her personal guardian angel. Some things are more important than mission parameters. That's when the station's main security force finally arrived. 2 full squadrons of heavily armed Vrex Marines, equipped with military-grade armor and weapons that could punch holes through starship hulls. They deployed in perfect formation, using textbook suppression tactics. It should have been overkill. It was overkill by any reasonable standard. Jake looked at them like they were mildly inconvenient insects. "Attention, Terran subject," the squad leader announced through his armor's external speakers. "You are ordered to surrender immediately or face lethal force." "Actually," Jake replied, pulling out what looked like a standard datapad, "I think you'll find that you're the ones who should be surrendering." He pressed a single button. Every piece of electronic equipment the Marines were carrying immediately turned against them. Their armor locked up, their weapons powered down, and their communications systems began playing what sounded suspiciously like Terran classical music at maximum volume. "How?" Vex Matol demanded, his tentacles writhing in panic. "Those systems are isolated. They're hardened against electronic warfare." Jake shrugged. "Yeah, but they're not hardened against someone who understands the underlying physics better than the people who built them. See, when you grow up on a world where the weather includes electromagnetic storms that can fry unshielded electronics, you get really good at making things work under impossible conditions." That's when the cavalry arrived. The first sign was the gentle rumble that ran through the station's superstructure. Then the lights dimmed as something massive docked with the main airlock. Then came the sound that made my heart skip several beats in sequence. Human voices. Lots of them. Coming through the station's communications system. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the TDF Unbreakable. Vel'tar Prime Station. You are hereby ordered to stand down and prepare to be boarded. This is not a request." Jake grinned at my expression. "Did I mention that the 3rd Engineering Corps travels with its own escort fleet? We engineers can be a bit paranoid about working alone in hostile territory. Through the market's observation windows, I could see them. Terran Defense Force ships, sleek and predatory, surrounding our station like sharks around wounded prey. They hadn't just sent a rescue team. They'd sent a battle group. You see," Jake continued conversationally, "the thing about humans is that we don't like it when people hurt our friends. And we really, really don't like it when people enslave children. So when we find someone doing both," he gestured toward the fleet outside, "well, we tend to take it personally." The station shuddered as magnetic grapples locked onto the hull. What followed wasn't an invasion. It was a surgical dismantling of everything we thought we knew about galactic power structures. The Terran Marines who boarded Vel'tar Prime moved with the same calculated efficiency as Jake, but multiplied by about 200. They didn't destroy the station, they dissected it. Every computer system, every database, every hidden cache of information was copied, analyzed, and cross-referenced with what I could only assume was a massive intelligence network. At 73 slave operations across 12 sectors, Captain Chen announced to the assembled station personnel, reading from a datapad that seemed to contain our entire criminal network. 437 trafficking routes, over 2,000 missing persons cases that we can now close. I watched in horrified fascination as my entire worldview crumbled. These weren't the primitive Deathworlders we'd been told about. These were apex predators who'd been playing a game we didn't even know existed. But you're supposed to be barbarians, Krell then whimpered from his restraints. You hit things with sticks and rocks. We also invented nuclear fusion, quantum computing, and really excellent coffee, Captain Chen replied dryly. Funny how people only remember the sticks and rocks part. The most disturbing part wasn't the military efficiency or the technological superiority. It was the compassion. Human medics treated everyone equally, slaves, guards, even the traders who'd been torturing them moments before. They set up refugee centers, established communication networks to help freed prisoners contact their families, and somehow managed to turn a slave market into a humanitarian aid station in less than 6 hours. Little Zara'nix had been adopted by a human family within a day. Sold, not traded, adopted. As in, legally becoming part of their family unit with all the rights and protections that entailed. The Hendersons, I think their name was. They had 3 other children, 2 of whom were also adopted from various unfortunate circumstances across the galaxy. Why? I asked Jake as the cleanup operations continued around us. Why do you do this? What do you get out of it? Jake looked at me like I'd ask why water was wet. Because it's the right thing to do. Because everyone deserves to be free. Because when we see someone crying in chains, we can't just walk away. He paused, watching as Zara'nix laughed at something one of the Henderson children had said. You want to know the real difference between humans and most other species? It's not that we're stronger or smarter or more adaptable. It's that we remember what it felt like to be helpless, and we decided never to let it happen to anyone else if we could prevent it. Within a month, the humans had dismantled every major slave operation in 3 sectors. They didn't conquer territory or demand tribute. They just fixed things. And when they were done, they left, but not before establishing what they called monitoring stations, which everyone knew were really just polite terms for, "We'll be watching you." Word spread quickly through the galactic underworld. There was a new player in the game, and they had a very specific set of skills and a very particular moral code. They called them the Chain Breakers, and they were absolutely terrifying. 6 months later, I was working as a security consultant for legitimate shipping companies. Turns out having first-hand experience with the fall of Vel'tar Prime made me oddly valuable in the new galactic economy when I finally learned the full scope of what had happened. I was reviewing incident reports when I came across a familiar name, Jake Morrison. But not just one report, dozens of them. Dating back years. Jake Morrison, captured during raid on Nexus Station mining operation. Jake Morrison, sold at Kefri flesh markets. Jake Morrison, imprisoned on Valdris penal colony. Same human, same name, same face in the surveillance photos. Either Jake Morrison was the unluckiest human in the galaxy, or the truth hit me like a meteor impact. It had all been planned. Not just Vel'tar Prime, but everything. Every capture, every sale, every seemingly random appearance at slave markets across the galaxy. Humans had been systematically infiltrating the entire trafficking network for years, mapping it from the inside, gathering intelligence, and preparing for something massive. And we never noticed because we thought they were just dumb animals. I pulled up the galactic news feeds from the day of the Vel'tar Prime incident. What I found made my remaining scales fall out. simultaneous raids. Hundreds of them. Slave operations across 17 different sectors, all hit at exactly the same time by perfectly coordinated human strike forces. It wasn't just Jake Morrison, there were dozens of captured humans, all working together, all feeding information back to their mysterious command structure. The entire galactic slave trade had been gutted in a single day. The final piece of the puzzle came when I accessed the recorded communications from that day. Captain Chen's voice broadcast on every emergency frequency in known space. Attention all slave traders, traffickers, and black market operators. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. As of today, the human race is officially ending your industry. We have spent 5 years documenting your crimes, mapping your networks, and preparing our response. You have 48 hours to release all prisoners and surrender to the nearest Terran facility for processing. The message continued, but what chilled me to my very core was what came next. To those who refuse, we know where you are. We know where you operate. We know your names, your families, your favorite breakfast cereals. We are coming for you. And when we arrive, you will learn why Earth is classified as a death world. But to those who surrender voluntarily, you will be treated fairly under Terran law. We believe in justice, not revenge. We believe in rehabilitation, not retribution. We are offering you the same compassion we wish you had shown your victims. The broadcast ended with coordinates to dozens of Terran facilities across the galaxy and a simple statement that redefined everything I thought I knew about warfare, politics, and the nature of civilization itself. Slavery ends today. Freedom begins now. This message will repeat until every chain is broken. They weren't just dangerous individually. They weren't just smart or adaptable or ruthless. They were all of those things, but coordinated on a galactic scale, with patience measured in years and determination measured in generations. And they had been watching us the entire time,